Let's go live now to the Resources Minister, Keith Pitt, who joins me from Canberra. Thanks for your time. Let's start, before we get to those issues of national security and so on, with the by-election results. Some mixed results there for the coalition, quite strong for the Nationals in Monero, not so much for your Liberal cousins in Bega, Mr Pitt.
Mr Pitt's my father, Kieran. I should start with that. But look, it's a great result for Nicole overall. Just really close to Canberra here, next door actually, and I was out briefly on one of the booths yesterday, and the turnout was really low. I mean, there's a lot of postal votes still to come in, so I think there could be some changes yet. Obviously the trend is set, but congratulations to Nicole. She's done well to transition that seat across from the former Deputy Premier. Yes, we're obviously, Bega looks like a loss. Labor had a very strong candidate down there. But generally, these things don't reflect into a federal result. The voters know the difference between each level of government, and I think it's just a reflection on where they're at. And generally, governments lose by-elections.
Matt Keane said to me last night on our panel that the dramas around the federal government recently wouldn't have helped the brand as they headed into these by-elections. Is that reasonable?
There's always plenty of free advice in this job. Mr Keane, if he's looking for someone to blame, he might want to have a look in the mirror. But the reality is very straightforward. There will be a federal election in coming weeks that will be fought on federal issues. These were state by-elections for state campaigns run by the state governments and, of course, the state-based parties.
The leaks out of Cabinet in the last week must concern you, though, as we are only a few months out from a general election.
Look, I obviously can't comment about Cabinet discussions, as you'd know, and your viewers would certainly know. But what I would say is this: we have been we are a very strong unit, and this is not something you see from this government. And once again, I don't want to reflect on what may or may not have happened anywhere, to be honest. But we're just getting on with the job. We're just getting on with the business of being in government and doing what matters to people. And I think I'll leave the rest of the commentary to others.
But if you look at the 5 Liberals crossing the floor, 2 days after the Prime Minister called for unity, these leaks, it's messy, isn't it, at the moment?
Well, look, for my colleagues, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, we are the parties of freedom and liberty. We are. You are entitled to cross the floor. If this was the Labor Party, they'd be expelled. That's exactly what happens. But look, I am disappointed they have a responsibility, those 5 individual members, and one did the right thing. To tell not only their colleagues, but their party room, their party, the leadership and the Prime Minister of their intentions. We all accept that we have individual freedoms on our side of politics. Everyone is entitled to make that decision. But you've got to tell someone. You can't just show up after a very long sitting, I've got to say. And, mate, I've done a lot of all-nighters and long shifts and all those sorts of things, and it was a pretty messy few hours there about 4 o'clock in the morning. There was people sprayed all over the place having a camp.
Will it hurt the government, though, that you haven't been able to legislate what was an election promise, a religious discrimination bill? Will that reflect poorly on the coalition, given that was something the Prime Minister was committed to and it hasn't been secured?
Well, it's also something we've spent 3 years having discussions, round tables, tens of thousands of submissions to get it right, and I think it was right. It was the right decision. Well, unfortunately, as we just discussed, we've had some individuals who decided to take a different position. But look, I think everyone out there knows that this is something that we want to do. We're determined to get it done. It's clearly not going to happen in this term of government, which I think is unfortunate and disappointing. And I think generally those people who are out there, and there's some 14 million Australians who have a religious faith, want to see these things done, these changes made, and it's something we need to do.
On the protests that you've observed in Canberra over the last 24 hours, really significant protests up to Parliament House and around the nation's capital over the last couple of weeks. The Prime Minister convened National Cabinet. Now he's saying it's all the states who have acted unilaterally on mandates and so on when it comes to vaccines. He's trying to wash his hands of a large part of what's been the response to COVID-19, isn't he?
Well, a couple of points first. I mean, everyone is entitled. It's their democratic right to protest, but they do have to do that in a way which doesn't instil fear and everything else. I didn't see anyone setting Parliament House on fire in this lot, I've got to say. but they're entitled to their view. But it is misdirected. I mean, these are decisions of the premiers. It's not the federal government that's making those decisions. These are state-based decisions, and they do vary all over the country. As someone that travels border to border and state to state when I can, there's just so many different positions being taken. There is a lot of confusion around it. But fundamentally,
the federal government's also imposed vaccine mandates in certain industries, including, of course, the aged care sector. So for the Prime Minister to say and try and distance himself from this approach when your government's done a similar sort of thing, including with the international borders requiring people to be double vaccinated, it's a little hard to accept, isn't it, given that's been the federal government approach as well?
Oh, not at all. Those are decisions based on risk. What we've seen is very broad-based mandates. Well, particularly, the Queensland government in particular, they're very broad-based mandates. I mean, this concept around teachers, we had school kids at schools in the midst of the pandemic when it was at its highest, but now there's a problem when we've got vaccination levels of over 90%. I just think everyday people can't quite get their head around that, and neither can I. So once again, I mean, we've made decisions based on risk. I think it's absolutely the right decision in terms of people who are coming from other nations. Are you angling for the votes of a lot of those people that showed up yesterday? It sounds like it, because on the one hand, endorsing the state's approach, not wanting to intervene in things like WA borders, but yet putting the boot in when it comes to this because it suits you politically. No, not at all. This is a long-held position, and anyone wants to check, you can see I made a statement on this some months ago, which is exactly the same. Kieran, this is about fundamental freedoms. I understand why people are agitated and why there were so many protesters here yesterday, but it is misdirected. They should be directed at the state premiers that are making those decisions, and not all of them have exactly the same approach. Now, at a Commonwealth level, we are getting on with the business of getting out of COVID, getting back into the recovery, and we are in an incredibly strong economic position. I mean, unemployment's at 4.2% and expected to go lower. We've got 230,000 kids in apprenticeships. It's the highest number since 1963.
We're almost out of time. Just finally, on the China and national security issue, you heard what Anthony Albanese said there. He said there is going to be no weakening at all if he wins the election of the US alliance. He's totally committed to the Quad. He says that China's changed, and his response clearly is in line with what the government has been doing. Is it irresponsible then to try and undermine him on a national security issue? Is that against the national interest? We don't live in a one-party state. We've got two major parties. Labor could win. Is it in the national interest to be saying that he's compromised?
Well, I think it's a question of who can you trust. And you're going to go look at Joel Fitzgibbon's comments on Sky this week about a certain event, as he described it in 2010, around carbon taxes that will and won't be around. I mean, I heard some of Mr Albanese's interview about what he'll do for the country and the economy. Well, an alliance between him and the Greens is a $500 billion hit to investment in the resources sector.
He's ruled that out, though,
jobs would be lost.
He's ruled that out.
Well, I mean, that's just ridiculous. It's exactly what they did in 2010. It's what they'll do again to form government. It's what they'll do again for the keys to the lodge. And you've only got to look at their history because they've got form.
Keith Pitt, appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Hey, great to be with you.